Hey there, everybody. Welcome to our new Blacklist video. We saw a lot of the responses that came in when we asked you guys if you would want to be a part of a series rewatch of season 1 this summer, and it was really overwhelmingly, yes, do it. And with that in mind, we're doing it. This is a rewatch discussion of season 1, episode 1, the pilot, the very first episode, the story of Zamani. There is, of course, so much to get into.
I absolutely loved rewatching this pilot. There are few pilots that I've watched in my life where I rewatch them and it hits me the same way every time, like Lost. Lost is one of my favorite pilots. I've watched it a whole bunch of times. Every time I watch it, it still has that same punch on me. And that is the same with the Blacklist. This pilot is so good and there's so much in it that it just like I had such enjoyment watching this over again. It hit the same.
It's really justifying further why NBC, like so many years ago, like put this show in a primo spot. They actually remember when they actually promoted the Blacklist? Like there was a big campaign behind this show because they knew it was going to be a hit. We are going to talk about the story. We'll talk about maybe some connections to where we are now, a
Yep.
couple of things that don't really make sense at all anymore.
Yeah, some things have changed a little bit, but that's all right.
Yeah, well, before we go further, though, hit that subscribe button because, yes, we will be doing this rewatch. We want you guys to be here along for the ride pretty much from start to finish.
Yeah, and if you guys want to help out the channel, sort of bring in some new people, share this video, share
Yeah.
it on social media, share it with your friends, have them come and subscribe to the channel so that, we can continue to keep building over here with you guys, having more conversations. So definitely hit that subscribe button, share the video, follow us over on Instagram, all that really good stuff.
Also, if you guys don't know, we are currently doing Obi-Wan Kenobi. It is such a fun show. If you're an old school Star Wars fan, you don't even have to be like a diehard fan of like every show and movie that's out there. It's
No.
like very original trilogy centric. So check out those videos. We have had so much fun talking about that.
All right, where do you want to start with this?
Okay, I just think we start at the very beginning because this is such a wonderful introduction to this show. Reddington's outside with this dude, Newton Phillips, who we'll talk more about down the line, and he decides he's going to go in to the FBI building, basically say who he is, take off his jacket, and then just put his arms in the air. It is such a good visual sequence.
It is just still such a just a powerful scene for him to sort of take this kind of control. He's the most wanted man out there.
Yeah.
Everybody's looking for him to just walk right in, let himself get arrested, say that he wants to talk to Cooper and have it get started.
And then, of course, we get this eventual demand of, I will only speak with Elizabeth Keene. And this is sort of where the initial sort of pieces fall into place, where we've all asked this so many times over the years. Why did Reddington choose this moment to turn himself in? Like, why did he do it?
Yeah, and I mean, there obviously we've seen later on in the series that he wants her to take over the empire, but it feels very much like specifically in this episode, he wanted her to find out the truth about her husband. And because he doesn't have any connection to her that she knows of, he can't just show up at her house and be like, by the way, your husband, this and that and whatever, check the floorboards. It was all so well thought out to have Tom sort of bled out right on top of the spot where she was going to have to cut up the carpet and find the loose floorboards to find the box of everything. She had to see it for herself. And this was really the only way that this was going to come together.
And it's such a sort of brilliant look into who Reddington is already. And because we see him do this all the time over the years. I mean, there's that infamous line of everything about me is a lie. So he knows that he can't just tell us this stuff and she won't necessarily believe it. So he kind of goes into this in a show not tell sort of philosophy. So I think that is a big driving force for him showing up at this point. I think he, because no matter what his connection is to her, like no matter who he is, and we'll obviously have plenty of these discussions, he does love her on some level. And I think there was a hole in his heart he's trying to fulfill throughout this show. And I think this was just sort of like all the factors coming together at the right time for him and sort of realizing now is my opportunity to actually get to know this woman. She's in the FBI now. I can actually naturally be there, fulfill my greater purpose. Maybe it was on the back of his head that, okay, maybe she could take over for me someday, but he wasn't seemingly sick at this point. I don't think he thought it was coming anytime soon.
I just have to say how much I actually miss the Liz character. I've never been, I know there's a lot of people out there like, she can go, whatever, whatever. And her character did change quite a lot in those later seasons. But this pilot and how good and well thought out this character is a 10 out of 10. She's fantastic. And the chemistry between her and Red and that going back and forth, that sort of Silence of the Lambs feel a little bit of sort of the rookie, where you've also got the career criminal who knows everything about her from the time she was little. Like, it's just reading into her, being able to manipulate her into being able to find out these things about her husband and lead her along this path. I really miss having her on the show.
I miss this version of Liz especially, like, so
Yes.
much. Like, because this Liz was actually fun at times. It's sort of like she had a real legitimate life. She had some things she was trying to accomplish. She wanted to adopt. She had a dog, and it's like this dog just like disappears into the ether.
She's also really self-aware. Like,
Yeah.
I really love that scene with Cooper where he's like, okay, so you're a profiler, so profile yourself. And she's like, oh, I've done this and this and this. He's like, yeah, I have your resume. That's not what I'm asking. And she really gets into where she's like, well, I have narcissistic tendencies. I'm really closed off, all these sort of deeper, perspective of herself. I really miss this Liz so much.
It's just so true, and it makes it all the more just frustrating that like the end of Liz's arc, it was like she only cared about two things, which is number one, answers, and number two, Agnes. And I ordered them that way specifically because it seemed like she cared even more about answers than she did Agnes most of the time.
Yeah, which was also something we saw in this pilot of how much she wanted a kid.
Yeah.
She was willing to, she wanted to go out and adopt. She just wanted to make herself a mom any way that she possibly could. We had the whole story with the girl that, had the bomb and everything. And she was like, oh, in my scar, and rub this to be more powerful, and got the bracelet. And I was like, okay, they've clearly made this side of her as well, that she really, really wants to be a mom any way she can. And then they bring in Agnes, and then Agnes just kind of disappears for a while.
Yeah, it felt like
what happened?
It felt like in that last episode, like those last couple episodes before Liz left, they tried to be like, no, this was always here with her all along, because it's like, oh, they're having family time now with Reddington, and oh, here's an older version of the girl we saw in this episode suddenly back, and it's just like, it vanished for so long, and it's just like there were a lot of parts of Liz that were very interesting, and there's a lot in this pilot that is just almost funny and weird to look at, like how expensive this episode probably was.
Oh, this episode felt like I was watching a movie. And I think that that's why this pilot is one of those very special pilots that just hits, and it hits hard right away in all the right spots, where it felt like I was watching a movie. The action was excellent. The dialogue was like spot on. The more intimate scenes of Liz and Red and having those conversations, like you said, where he's like, oh no, you shouldn't trust me. Everything about me is a lie. And then he's getting more into trying to talk about her history, to be like, oh, your dad was a career criminal, and your mom, she died of fear and shame. And it's just like, okay, well, we all kind of know a lot more about Katarina at this point. Like, he really we have this sort of thing that it's like, oh, he never lies to her sort of thing. But like here we are in the pilot with this where he's like, oh, your mother died of fear and shame. And it's kind of like, well, no, she didn't.
I'm I'm still not even sure she's dead. Like, it's one of these sort of things. Well, I guess technically, if this Reddington is Katarina, she's 100, but she's still around as Reddington. But it's also
And not fear and shame. She is strong AF.
yeah, it's one of it's a crazy sort of thing to sort of look back at these lines because it's also like your father was a career criminal. Well, the real Reddington is insofar as we sort of knew, like, this guy was a military officer. Like, I don't think his defining legacy was necessarily all of that. So this is Reddington like distorting information, and he may not even call it a lie because I think this is what's so crazy about this character is that he can tell half truths, he can tell quarter truths, he can do whatever and sort of justify it after the fact and be like, no, 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 that wasn't a lie. Here is what I meant when I said this. And that's why our minds can be like twisted into knots as we watch this show.
Absolutely.
It's a part of what makes this so interesting and so crazy.
Okay, let's talk about the scar, because that was one of the biggest things that when I came out of the pilot the first time and the second time, I'm just like, oh, that scar. Obviously, it's something that's going to carry through. She's, always scratching at it. She's like, yeah, my father gave this to me. I'm like, oh, okay. And then she finds the box and it's got the same pattern on the box. And, we've learned a lot more about the scar over the years, but it did feel like there was a period of time where it just kind of vanished.
Yeah. Like, don't get me wrong. I wasn't like sitting around in like season 4 looking at various photos of Megan Boone's hand being like, where is the scar? But it just feels like it is so noticeable and so prominent in this episode. And I don't know if this is a sort of situation where the writers always kind of had a little bit of a plan with it, but not so much of a plan that they could like constantly bring it up. So they were just like, let's just push that down the road until we actually need to talk about it. But it really did sort of feel like for a while they either just forgot it or they couldn't care enough to even make it seem like she still had it.
Okay, let's talk about Tom, because I know that there is, again, a divide with Tom. There are people that really like the Tom character and people that did not like him at all. And I land in the camp that I found him really fascinating. And I found him fascinating straight from the pilot because they did not hold back on the fact that there is something shady going on with him right away. That it's like, oh, he's so loving and caring and trying to adopt and going to the zoo and the teacher and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, nobody's that great. But to go from that extreme to he's got money and passports and a gun and everything hidden in the floorboards, it's like, holy smokes. Like it took such a turn.
It's a great reveal to have this in the pilot. Like, it's great that they didn't wait around on all of this because I think the number one goal with your first episode needs to be, I need to make sure that people want to keep watching. And yes, it already had the presence of James Spader, who's obviously fantastic and has a big audience, but it's just like, we need to have kind of that constant stream of twists early on. And, years down the road, I mean, I think it gets to a situation where they don't know as much what to do with him, but it just feels like this Tom early on is so fascinating and so good. And Ryan, and I know this from watching New Amsterdam too, he's so good at playing like the good guy that you really want to believe him. That's what makes him play the bad guy or the morally questionable guy all the more interesting.
Yeah, which is why I think Reddington had to do what he did as a show not tell, because he's so convincing. Tom is so convincing that there was no way that if you just told Liz that she was going to believe it. Even if you kind of told Liz and tried to show her some stuff, she'd be like, whatever, you picked that up. You planted that sort of thing. She needed to see it on her own to really put her on this journey. And it's an interesting journey too, because one of the things that she mentioned when she was having that conversation profiling herself is that she was like, I just want to really understand, and I'm super fascinated, and I really want to be part of the criminal mind that we know later she basically becomes a criminal herself. And we even see that with Reddington too, where he's like, you're thinking like a cop. I need you to think like a criminal, which is again that idea of, is he already kind of setting some footwork here for her to take over? Because she can't think like a cop if she's going to take over. She has to think like him. Was this lesson number one?
I think he kind of was. It's sort of like, we mentioned earlier on, like, I think this was always in Reddington's mind. I don't think he necessarily had a plan as to, like, when she was going to take over, but I think he needed to lay the groundwork for this early, because if she doesn't start thinking like a criminal ever, then she's never going to be able to do this. She's never going to be remotely good at it. So I think this episode sort of lays the groundwork, and it certainly helps that Liz, per her own admission, has some of these tendencies that eventually could make her capable of it in the first place.
No ARAM, no Dembe. We
no.
saw at the end of this episode that Reddington was kind of like, okay, I'm here to make a deal with you. I'm going to need some sort of protection. So you're going to have to put some people on the table here that I can pick somebody to be like my right hand kind of protection, whatever, which is kind of strange because I was just like, we know that his and Dembe's relationship is like years deep. Like he doesn't just show up because Cooper was like, how about Dembe? Like that's not really how it worked, right? So that was kind of strange. There are some things obviously from the pilot that are later changed around a bit, like that, like what was going on with her, where she was like, oh yeah, this fire happened. I was a teenager. I was 14 years old. And it's kind of like, okay, well, later on, we know that she was younger than that.
I think a lot of times with these first episodes, they're done pretty far in advance. And I think after you sort of look back and you reflect on the pilot, there's just certain things that inevitably you end up changing because you realize, okay, it works better for the story. Like the fire in particular, I think they just sort of realized that it's better off if Liz's memory of the fire is a little bit hazier, because then that allows them to sort of come in and add all these different mysteries about who was there. Because it's like when you're a teenager, like I can remember most things from when I was a teenager. And if I was in a fire like that, I would know everything. There would be no gray area there.
Okay, let's talk about how this episode could connect to season 10, because one of the things obviously that happened at the end of season 9 is everything with Wu Jing, where he's kind of like, he's got the MARVIN list.
Yeah.
The big bad in this episode, the Blacklist in this episode, he's dead. Yeah.
No more Zamani. We don't got to worry about seeing him at any point in the future. And, it's an interesting choice because they're going so full circle with some other stories. It would be nice if like, oh, here's this other criminal reminder of the pilot that we're going to bring back at some point. But, as you guys will see through a lot of this, there are plenty of other criminals out there who are still alive, who could be a part of the show moving forward. And ultimately, Zamani's not that memorable or interesting a blacklister. I think at this point, they also weren't really willing to dive into like the full-on super crazy blacklisters, which I really think like the Stewmaker, when we get to that, like I think Stewmaker is like the foundation for the weird comic book villainy sort of character.
Absolutely.
Well, this I think is going to be a very fun journey through this show. We hope you guys watch along with us, be here with us, talk about, your impressions when you watch this for the first time. How do you think things connected? How do you even think the show evolved and maybe changed things? And we will really enjoy discussing all this with you.
Yeah, we're excited to be here all summer. Every Friday, we're going to be doing the next episode, and seeing how it can connect going into this new season coming up in 2023, because, they have brought back this blacklister from season 1.
Yeah.
Who else is going to be coming back?
All right, well, hit that subscribe button. Check us out on Instagram, Matt and Jess TV, and we'll see you here next time.